Everybody good? Good. I'm using my laptop today. Don't call me, by the way, this morning, because when you do, it goes right to my laptop and all my notes are gone. And don't try to be funny and do that just because I said that either. Anyway, glad you were here. I thought before I started this sermon that I'm super anxious to give, I would have a student share. As some of you know, we went on a mission trip in June to Mazatlan, Mexico. We took 19 of us, high school students and leaders, and had a great trip. It was one of those great mission trips. You know, our hope is always to take students on these trips, and a trip that they'll never forget. And I think this is one of those. This is going to be one of those trips for them. It was super impactful. We did ministry every day. The local missionaries would take us to all these ministry sites. We did prison ministry. We ministered to people at the dump. We did children's ministry, prayer walk in the neighborhoods, recovery center. We did a ton of stuff. One thing we did was we went to the local hospital. It was a hospital for the poorest of the poor out in the outskirts of town. And we didn't go in and pray for people necessarily, but there's lots of people that hang around outside the hospital, loved ones, friends, family members of people that were either having surgery or recovering. And some of those people outside would wait for weeks. They would be outside. I mean, it's just big dirt fields all around it, and people stand outside. And our group would come in and broken up into small groups. We'd walk around and pray for people, and it was super powerful to see our kids laying hands on people and praying for people. I just wanted to have somebody come and talk. So I have Noah Bernard. He's going to share about an experience he had while we were there at the hospital. Can we give Noah a big hand? Go get him, Tiger.
All right. Hello? Okay. My name's Noah Bernard, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go with Joel and the rest of the team to Mexico. To start off, on our way to the hospital, we picked up some bread and water, and then we were handing that out in individual groups. One of the older ladies that we ministered to and gave some bread and water to came up to my group and asked if we could go inside and pray for her husband. So we went inside, but the rule at the hospital was for every family member visiting, they could only bring 2 other visitors. So then we had to have a translator go, of course, and then I was the first one who volunteered. So I got to go and do that. We went into this guy's room, and it was crazy to see the condition that he was in, because when we first went in, he was asleep, and his wife had to wake him up. He was covered in these dirty blankets. Some even had blood stains, and he got to telling us his story. So he works as a tree limber. He was about an hour's drive away from his house, 40 foot up in a tree. He was heading down, and he slipped and fell that 40 feet and hit his back on a root that was coming out of the ground. And he was immediately paralyzed from where he hit his back down. And he was screaming in pain and screaming for help when about 20 minutes later, a boy came along, and he kept telling us that he didn't think this boy was very right in the head because he just ignored him. And when he was yelling at the boy asking for help, and even when he offered to pay the boy, he just kept ignoring him and skipping along. So about another 20 minutes went by when he was able to crawl to this clearing. And once he got there, 3 dogs emerged from the woods around him. And once they realized that he was practically dying, they started to attack him. And that went on for another 20 minutes. Luckily, he was able to fend them off with the machete he had from limbing. But that was without its bites and scratches and all sorts of things. But he crawled for about another hour and made it to a dirt road where luckily there was a car coming, and they saw him, picked him up, and drove him to the nearest hospital, which was 3 hours away. And even once he got there, like all the other people sitting around the hospital, he had to wait for 2 days to get into the hospital to get treatment. And I just think, talking to him, it was crazy to see the amount of faith that he had that the Lord would take care of him. Because I don't know many people that would survive going through something like that. And he was positive that even though he felt like he was going to die, it wasn't his time to go, and the Lord wasn't going to let him die. And I think America needs more people with faith like that. So, yeah.
Go, Noah. One of the nights at our trip, Noah went up on the roof of the place that we were sleeping and prayed to the Lord. He prayed, Lord, show me what you want me to do to serve you. Which I thought was pretty inspiring. I'm sure you all prayed that when you were in high school, right? Maybe you did, I don't know. Well, this morning I hope this is going to be helpful, what I'm about to share. All week I've been thinking about this family from my former church. It was a Christian family, certainly a Christ-centered home. And I remember the dad specifically, just a godly dude, very committed to our church. And his daughter was a volleyball player. She was tall, beautiful, talented, and she was not just another volleyball player, she was exceptional. In fact, in middle school and high school, she was on all the traveling teams and all the all-star teams, and when she could, she would come to church, and I would talk to her, and I knew that she knew Christ. She was a Christian for sure, but she could never really come to youth group. You know, she couldn't go on a trip with us. She couldn't go on a mission trip with us for sure. But every time I saw her, I just always thought, wow, that's a great girl. And of course, she did so well that she got offered a scholarship. She got a full ride scholarship to a big university. I can't remember what school it was. But that's kind of what everybody that spends all that time going to practice and traveling with teams, you always hope you're going to get this big scholarship, and she did. And she did very well in college. And 2 years after she graduated from high school, her dad comes to me after service, after church one day, and said that he was very concerned. He said he could just tell from his conversations with his daughter since she left home, he could tell that she was drifting from the Lord. In fact, after 2 years, this daughter told her father that she no longer believed in God, that she was an atheist, that she had rejected everything, the belief system, the biblical worldview belief system that she'd been raised in. And he was devastated. I mean, you can kind of see how that can happen, right? I mean, she spent so much time surrounded by good people, certainly good people, but they were from the secular worldview, secular meaning without faith or religious belief. And you can be a good person and be very secular. And she spent so much time in that environment that it became normal for her. It seemed natural, normal. And so her limited time around things of the faith, the things of the faith began to seem odd or out of place. She didn't feel like she fit. So over time, that broke her down. And she called herself an atheist. And the dad felt awful. He felt like such a failure. And of course, I tried to encourage him. And parents, if you find yourself in that situation right now, I'm just going to tell you, remember, the game is not over. If your kids, right? If your kids have walked away from the faith, the game is not over. The final chapter of your son or daughter's life has not been written. Just remember that. I've been through this as a dad. I told that guy, listen, the game's not over. After the first quarter, if you're behind, you don't say, well, I guess the game is over. No, there's a lot of game to be played. So I want to encourage you. And this guy, I appreciated this guy. From that point on, he had a scholarship fund for our youth group that anytime there was a camp, he would pay a scholarship. Since his daughter could never go, and he saw the long-term effect of that, he paid for a student to go and then a friend to go. He would pay 2 scholarships for every trip we did. But here's the danger, isn't it? We live in this secular world. It reminds me of Judges chapter 21, where it says, "In those days Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes." In America, we find ourselves in the middle of this clash of worldviews. And I want to talk about worldviews for a minute. And there's a lot of information here. I put it on slides to help. But I hope this is kind of I hope this helps you get a handle on some of the things happening in America today. What's a worldview? Let me give you a few people have defined worldview. The first slide says it's your basic beliefs about life in the world. It's the starting point from which you make all your decisions and actions. It's a description, again, of what you believe. Thirdly, it's all about what you believe, not just about life, but about where we're going and where we're coming from. And then some writer said it like this, and I like this one. It's like a pair of glasses that you see through from which you see the world. It's how you see the world because you wear a certain shade of glasses. And of course, the last one here, it's one thing that's important about worldview to remember is that what you believe about God is the starting point for your worldview. You see, we think that everybody thinks like we do, but not everyone has the same worldview. They're not looking through the same shade of glasses. That's why when some people believe stuff, you just cannot believe it. They're looking at things from a different worldview. And today we're looking at the secular worldview and the biblical worldview. So let me spend a little extensive time explaining the secular worldview. First of all, know this. It's an atheistic philosophy. In the secular worldview, God is not at the center of the universe. Humankind is. And man decides what's right and wrong, what's just and unjust, what's moral and immoral. One writer says it like this. This is how he decides what's good and bad. Whatever promotes happiness, isn't that scary? Whatever makes me happy may make you sad, but if it makes me happy, that's good. Whatever promotes happiness, self-consciousness, whatever that means, self-identity, you see the gender identity movement, the sexual identity movements in this. Whatever promotes happiness, self-consciousness, self-identity, and love of others is good. Whatever hurts them is bad. And of course, here's the other one. There is no life beyond this life. That's super crucial to get. To understand secularism, there is no life beyond this life. You live and you die just like anything else in the universe. And here's an answer to suffering. You know, one of the big questions to Christianity is, well, if God is real, then why is there suffering in the world? And there's lots of great discussion and answers for that. But here's Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, when asked about atheism's answer to suffering in the world. He says, this is a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication. Some people are going to get hurt. Are you going to tell someone that's suffering? Some people are just going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, and nor any justice. The universe that we observe has no purpose, no evil, and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. In the hopelessness of that, the good question is, what's the purpose of life from a secular worldview? Here's what atheist John Mackey says. Man gets all the purpose in life he needs from within himself. Of course, my favorite description of the secular worldview is this guy. He's a cab driver from New York City. I don't know where I got this, but I love this quote. His name's Jose Martinez. They ask Jose to describe meaning in life, what he thinks meaning in life is. He says this. This is the secular worldview, wrapped up in a nice little package. He says, we're here to die. Just live and die. I drive a cab, I do some fishing, take my girl out, pay taxes, do a little reading, then get ready to drop dead. Life is a big fake. So as dark as all that is, What draws people to atheism and the secular worldview? The reason is simple. It's one word. It's the word freedom. Lee Strobel, the former atheist who became a Christian, and he wrote a bunch of books defending the Christian faith. The book series called The Case for Christ. I recommend him. He's a former atheist. And he says when he was an atheist, he thought all Christians were psychologically weak. He said that all Christians had a psychological need for God. That's why they believed. They had a psychological need for God. But after he became a Christian, he realized as an atheist, he had a psychological need too. And that's why he believed what he believed. He said he had the psychological need to be left alone. He wanted to make his own decisions about what's right and wrong, about who he was going to sleep with and who he wasn't going to sleep with. See, he didn't say, and this is what I used to think about atheists, that they weighed all the evidence. Is there a God or is there not a God? And they chose there is no God. That's not true. For the most part. The hope for freedom. This is what draws people to atheism, the idea that there is no God, or the freedom from a God. They can choose what's right and what's wrong. In fact, it's exactly what happened in Genesis chapter 3. Look at these verses. This is the conversation between Eve and the serpent. And Eve says this, tells the serpent, "We may eat from the tree in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that's in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." That's the big promise. You can be like God. You can be your own God. I mean, who do you think is behind the secular worldview? It's the same devil that was in the Garden of Eden, for sure. So I don't know what your thinking is. Maybe some of you are here. Maybe we have atheists here. I hope there is. I hope we have atheists here this morning. Or maybe you're toying with the idea of walking from the faith because you sense the freedom that's out there in the secular worldview. But listen, it's a trap. It's a trap. The end of that belief is emptiness, nothingness, no meaning, no hope. Let me let them speak for themselves. Here's what Oliver Wendell Holmes says, famous atheist from another generation. He says, "Life was not created. There's no creator. Everything is an accident. Billions of years ago, there was an explosion in the middle of nothing with matter, energy, whatever else. It exploded on accident, and life was created." That's what he believes. Everything's an accident. Everything we are is a result of natural selection and genetic programming. And after we die, we rot, and eventually the world will dry up. The solar system will burn up, and nothing we do will make any difference. Our future is nothingness. It's just the void. And I know that all this is super depressing. It is depressing. But for most people, they don't think this stuff through. And like one guy said, I think I have this on a slide. He said, and maybe this is you. He said, "I just sort of accept the way the world is, and I don't think about it a whole lot." That's safe. And then I heard this great quote from this atheist philosophy professor from NYU. Here's what he says. This is an atheist speaking. He says, "As an atheist, you are free to think deeply, but you have to be careful not to think too deeply." Why? Because if you take what you say you believe to its logical conclusion, this life, this world is meaningless. Now that you're thoroughly depressed, let me just give you one more depressing idea. The idea is this. The secular worldview is dominating our country and our society. They're becoming the dominant worldview. But here's the good news. In this room, many of you are rooted in the biblical worldview. You believe in the scriptures, the Word of God, the idea that God is real, but not just that He's created this universe. And not just that, but He holds it together. And not just that, but He's present. In fact, He's here in this room this morning with us. You believe that He sent His Son Jesus, who was fully God and fully man, who took our place at the cross. He took our punishment for our sin at the cross. You see, we rebelled against God. We went our own way, but we've been brought back to God because of Jesus' death on the cross and His resurrection. And one day, He will come back and He'll restore this world into its original design at creation. Praise the Lord. Now, having said all that, my brothers and sisters in Christ, if we are not careful, we will be deceived and influenced by the predominant secular worldview of our society. One of the first verses I learned when I started memorizing verses back when I was in high school is this one right here. Romans 12:2, it says, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." If you're not careful, you'll be pressured to conform. That's why we have to continually renew our mind and be transformed. And it can be so subtle, the influence can be so subtle that we don't notice it. You know, I use the illustration at youth group on Wednesday, and this happens to kids all the time. It's like going to the beach, you know, and you lay your towel down and you walk out into the water, right? And of course, you don't do that in the Pacific Northwest, right? Do you guys go in the water in the Northwest? You're crazy. Okay. Let's just say we're in Southern California, and we put our towel down, and we walk into the water, and we start riding the waves. We have a boogie board, or we body surf, or whatever. And we spend about a half hour out there, and we're catching the waves, and we decide, hey, we're going to come and get something to eat. And so you turn around, and you look straight back up on the shore where you'd left your towel, and you realize it's missing. You think someone stole your towel, right? But that's not really what happened. You realize your towel is up the coast a ways, you know. It's down shore, probably 30 or 40 yards. But you had this experience. You feel like you just walked right out, and you're going to walk right back in, but you've moved. What moved you? It's the current. There's the current. It's imperceptible. You can't tell it when it's happening, but you're being moved by the current. If you're not careful, you will slowly be caught in the current of secularism, just like that volleyball, the volleyball player that I talked about in my opening story. Let me just give you a couple of quick things to help you keep the faith in these challenging times. To keep the faith, number one, know what you believe. You may have asked Christ into your life. You may have a relationship with Jesus. You may understand that. But for a lot of people, a lot of their thinking needs to be saved. It needs to be changed. It needs to be converted. In fact, I told them in the first service, there was a study done 10 years ago by the University of Notre Dame. The study was on the practice and beliefs of teenagers in America. And the good news from the research, they took 10,000 students. That's a huge sample size. And they asked very specific questions. It wasn't just 2 or 3 questions. But one of the things they learned from the study was that like 60% plus of the students surveyed called themselves Christians, which was encouraging. But when they did the follow-up questions, asking them to explain what they believe, almost none of them could say anything, could articulate their faith at all, explain it at all. I mean, even in little small ways. They couldn't even mention Jesus dying on the cross for their sins. They didn't even have that down. One kid said, I remember some of the things that were in the study. One kid said, they asked him to explain what he believed, what made him a Christian. He says, well, I believe in Jesus and God and all those guys. One guy said, well, I'm not sure if I believe in God, but I'm still a Christian. So much confusion out there. And the difficult thing about that study, that was 10 years ago. Now those kids are parents. Here's what happens. You can be around things of the faith, and you can miss the point. That's why it is on you, and it's on me. To be diligent. It's our responsibility to pursue a deeper walk with Jesus and come to learn about the faith. If you're in middle school and high school this morning, listen, by the way, if you're in middle school or high school, can we give them a hand? Isn't that great they're here today? Great. We are glad you're here. I knew this guy when he was in high school, or middle school and high school, especially up until he was about 16 years old. He'd grown up in the church, and he thought he knew. He got so burned out on church because he would always say, I know all this stuff that they're teaching. I know all the Bible stories. And every time a talk would start, they go, oh, I know what he's going to say, or I know what she's going to say. And he became very unteachable. Someone would start talking, and in this guy's head, he would just go, yeah, blah, 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 blah. I've heard all before. That guy was me, as you probably guessed. Of course, after I stopped doing that, especially after I got out of high school, I realized I didn't know all the Bible stories. And I didn't know all the stuff that I thought that I knew. So I was not learning. I wasn't growing in that early stage in my faith and it was my fault. It's pride. It's pride, isn't it? It's pride. To think that you already know everything. It makes you unteachable. If you aren't teachable, no one can teach you, not even Jesus. The Pharisees didn't learn from Jesus. Jesus would say things, and the Pharisees would say, well, you can't be speaking to me. I already know all that stuff. All I know is this. Be hungry to grow. Study. If you're an adult in here, if you're a man, join men's Bible study. Get involved in the women's program on Monday nights. Sign up for every chance you can get. Every chance you can get to learn and grow. And parents, listen, pursue your spiritual life. Pursue knowledge in the Lord. Your kids are watching and they are taking notes, especially you dads. You need to know and learn about what you believe, or you'll be influenced by this secular worldview of our society. So you got to learn. Second thing, how to keep the faith. Don't desert the church. Don't desert the church. We need each other. I need church. I know not every week's a home run. We need youth group. I know not every week at youth group's a home run. We try. We try. We may not hit a home run, but we're swinging for the fence. That's how we always feel here. Here's what I know. Just remember this. Part-time church, and this has just been from my experience. Everybody gets an opinion. I get to speak from my 45 years of experience, and you can disagree with me if you want. Part-time church leads to part-time God. Part-time church leads to part-time God. People say, oh, Joel, it's not all about the church. Of course it's not all about the church. I'll say it again. Part-time church leads to part-time God. And you know what's really dangerous? You get to part-time God, it's a baby step to know God. Don't desert the church. Thirdly, let me say this to help you keep the faith. Be like Paul. Paul the Apostle. There was that old commercial series they would do, be like Mike. I'm saying be like Paul this morning. Look at Acts chapter 13. Paul is in this town called Pisidian Antioch. And I get him here in mid-sermon. Chapter 13, verse 47, it says this. For this is what the Lord has commanded us. He's speaking to a Gentile, mixed crowd of Gentiles and Jews. I made you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth. The Gentiles get excited. When the Gentiles heard this, they were glad and honored the word of the Lord, and all who were appointed for eternal life believed. and the word of the Lord spread through the whole region. But the Jewish leaders incited the God-fearing women of high standing and leading men of the city. They stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from their region. The ministry didn't seem to go well. They not only got kicked out of town, they got kicked out of the region. So Paul and Barnabas, they did what Taylor Swift said. They shook the dust. They shook the dust off their feet. Shake it off as a warning to them, and then they went to Iconium. They thought it went so bad, let's go do this to Iconium. But look at this in verse 52. It says, the disciples were filled with joy. It seemed like they failed, but they were excited. They were filled with joy in the Holy Spirit. So here's the thing. In this world that seems to be hostile toward faith, let's take this message of Christ, this biblical worldview, let's take it to our world like Paul did. We have been entrusted in this generation. We are at this moment in church history, in the story of history, and our job is to influence our world for Christ and tell people about Jesus. Why was Paul so determined? He seemed to fail in that one city. He went to the next city and continued to share the gospel. It's because he cared. Paul cared. Even in the book of Romans, he said he'd almost be willing to give up his salvation if all of Israel would come to know Christ. I mean, this guy cared about the lost. It reminds me of the story. I read a book called Close to Shore. It was about the first recorded shark attack in American history. It was in 1960. This guy, Charles Van Zandt, he was walking along the Jersey Shore, and it was evening. He decided to swim out into the ocean. And he swam out beyond the waves, and just like in Jaws, the shark grabbed him from underneath and pulled him down, and would let him up and pull him down, and let him up and put him down. And every time Charles would come above the water level, he would scream, "Help!" Well, fortunately, there was this guy walking along the beach, and he heard Charles screaming, and so he runs out. He runs out to save him. This guy's name is Stanley Fisher. Stanley runs out to save Charles, and he has to swim through bloody water, and he grabs Charles by the arm, and he pulls Charles' arm while the shark has his leg, and he does a tug-of-war with the shark, and Stanley wins. He pulls Charles to safety. Now, the thing from this story as I read it was, what would make you swim toward the shark? What would make you swim to save someone from the shark? Here's the thing. They were friends. Stanley knew Charles. He swam out, risked his life to save his friend. Now, I don't know if I would swim to the shark to save any of you, except for my wife. Hopefully I never have to choose. But that's a lot. But the point is this. Let's care. Let's take this message of Christ to this lost world. Let's do it one friend at a time, one family at a time, one campus at a time, one city at a time. We have to care. That's the point. It has to start from there. You know, and for me, I've been so influenced by evangelists from my past, Billy Graham and people like that. And from evangelistic movements like the Jesus movement. I was a little kid when the Jesus movement was happening. And Youth for Christ Campus Life, Campus Crusade for Christ. Have you heard of Campus Crusade for Christ? I was so influenced by that. In fact, we were trained how to share faith, and when I was in youth ministry at the time, we showed our kids how to share faith, and we led lots of kids to the Lord. We got to go to Moscow with Crusade. We had a team, part of a team of the first Americans into Moscow, and got to share the gospel in public classrooms, which was just like the book of Acts. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, I've been surrounded by this all my life, and the idea that the church's job is to put the wagons in a circle and hide is just so foreign to me. We have to care. Speaking of Crusade, Bill Bright, who started Crusade back in the 50s, it was a college ministry at UCLA, and over the decades, it became this worldwide evangelistic movement. Millions have accepted Christ through Crusade. I still have former students that are on staff with Crusade. One is in Japan right now. I mean, this guy has seen millions come to Christ. He retires, and in his early 80s, he comes over to where I lived, and he gathered a bunch of pastors and youth pastors together, and he wanted to do an evangelistic crusade in San Bernardino, California. Have you ever been to San Bernardino? San Bernardino, California. I don't know, I never was that impressed by San Bernardino. No offense. I was from Riverside. That wasn't great either. But Bill Brett, he's retired, millions to Christ, right? Comes to San Bernardino. He wants to do a crusade in San Bernardino because he's always had such a heart for San Bernardino, California. And in the middle of his speech, trying to get us all pumped about doing this, he started to cry. Started crying, he couldn't stop. This guy that had seen tens of millions come to Christ because of a ministry he began, he was weeping for the lost of this city. When was the last time? When was the last time you cried for the lost in our community? We have to care. We have to care about the lost. They've been lied to. They've been influenced by this secular worldview. And remember, our goal ultimately is not to win them to a biblical worldview. This isn't a philosophy we're trying to transform them into. It's not about a worldview, it's about a person, Jesus Christ. Speaking of Jesus, right now we're going to take communion, so let's prepare our hearts. God bless you.